2007 saw the release of You Are Empty to the West. It didn't end up getting much attention, and where it did, it wasn't too positive. It was panned for being slow, boring, and derivative of other games. And I'm not going to say that the game is perfect or a masterpiece, but I definitely think it was unfairly scored, especially compared to some other games around at the time. Initially released in 2006 by Digital Spray Studios and Mandel ArtPlains, You Are Empty is an atmospheric and linear shooter set in post-apocalyptic Russia. If you've been to my channel before, you know I am a fan of most of these things. And the story for the most part is basically what you get in the intro cutscene. You're a Soviet soldier which guards a factory and you get hit by a car. You're in a coma, you wake up, and everything is crazy. The next 6 hours will consist of you crawling through the ruined city, killing mutants, and trying to find out what happened. And in doing so, you'll experience a lot of fun things and a lot of bad things. The most blatant issue the game has is that for a shooter, the actual shooting isn't that great. There is a good variety of fun weapons in the game, but just like those game reviewers said all those years ago, it is pretty slow, which results in being boring. And there's no sprint button, which is a big shame because half the enemies constantly get in your face and kick your ass. But fortunately, a speedrunner of the game found a way to add sprint, and honestly, it's necessary. I added it halfway through my playthrough, and it brings the game from being indie horror slow to more like painkiller, which is definitely how the game should have been in the first place. I was able to get in contact with one of the game's developers. He was the originator of the whole concept and was the art director, and I ended up getting to ask him some questions about the game's design. When I inquired about the lack of sprint, he said it was mainly to focus on the immersion and atmosphere of the game, but it did also help to stop the player from getting out of bounds, which is pretty easy to do. I would still recommend adding sprint though, as it makes the combat less of a chore. But it's good to see there's a decent variety of enemies in the game. It goes from morbid depictions of Soviet life to actual gruesome monsters. And by the time you get sick of one, there's always something else to fight, so it never gets boring in that sense. It could have been even better though. It was unfortunate to learn that a lot of levels, weapons, and monsters were cut prior to the game's release. What would have been the game's most impressive feature as well wasn't there either. Initially, the developers intended to add a mutation mechanic, which would offer the player superpowers and more of a sense of progression. When you consider the vigors from Bioshock or the powers from Singularity, this could have been a really cool and fun feature as well as a selling point for the game. The game also has a surprisingly good soundtrack, part rock, part industrial. It really aids to the game's atmosphere at times. And while the game isn't beautiful, I found the level and art design kinda charming. It's really not a common thing where you get to walk around a Soviet city and admire the statues, posters, and overall aesthetic. I also got a lot of Half-Life 2 vibes from some levels, which does make sense considering Half-Life 2 was an inspiration for the developers, and also because Half-Life 2 does take place in the Eastern Bloc. The game's physics engine is pretty similar to Half-Life 2's as well. So now you know the pros and cons of You Are Empty. But what do you actually do? Well, you pick up a lot of notes and keys. Unfortunately, that's how you progress through most of the game. You're basically always going back and forth between finding a key for a door and finding a note telling you where to find the key. But sometimes in between levels you do get a cutscene like at the start of a game. They offer some vague story elements and generally look pretty good. I wish the game had more of these. And then sometimes you meet actual people. There's only a few of them, but they'll always offer you some exposition and guidance. Not to mention some amazing voice acting.
You need to get to the city council. The elevator is the only way out. Here is the key. There's a door in the yard. Use it. Go through the basements and the sewer and you'll reach the elevator. There will be a train. That's your only way of getting to the city. Help! You can make it! Hurry up! Ah! Ah!
There's really not much else to talk about. Some guns are better than others. The shotgun, pepper shot, and nail gun are what you'll use for most of the game. Then weapons like the C96 Mauser, which might as well be a water gun with a wrong reload animation. The wrench, which is as effective as hugging your enemy to death, as well as the electric gun if you like to accidentally kill yourself. Use those weapons if you're a masochist. So now it's time to talk about the plot. I don't expect many people to actually get and play this game, but if you do have that intent, skip to the time on the screen now. So, with the game's intro, you're a soldier which guards a factory. You get hit by a car, you get sent into a coma, and you wake up to, essentially, a post-apocalyptic society. Why though? Why is everyone except you and like 4 other people crazy? What's with these helicopter guys, the weird mutants and giant birds? Well, it's basically explained in 2 different stories, the game that you play and the cutscenes that you watch. From the people you talk to and the notes that you read, you've learned that the Soviet governments made a major mistake. And later you discover that the cause was a scientific project that had gone wrong. It's basically a device which alters how people think and act in order to make a better communist society. Obviously, it didn't work out as intended, you know, given the mutants and crazy people. Alongside that, you also have the story from all the cutscenes, which actually tells of another person's perspective. It tells the story of a smart yet weak kid. He gets picked on for not being strong, he sees people be violent, and he studies well but has some violent tendencies. And it's obvious that he is upset with how the world is. So it's obvious how this plays into the scientific project to remove humanity's negative traits. He's in fact one of the scientists that came up with the plan. And oh look, here he is at the place you work. So as you finally see how the stories start to coincide, you've made it to the end of the game. You can now stop this mind-altering device and hopefully save the world. As you make it to the top of the tower, you meet this guy, who is basically the common consciousness of the mind control device. He gives you a speech about how you're the ideal specimen given you're resourceful and independent and could fight your way here, and says he will give his place for you so you can rule the world. Or you can go back to the past and stop this from happening in the first place. I'm pretty sure this is the only option. I tried to do other things, but I'm pretty sure you just have to go back to the past to fix it all. And you do. You wake up like it's any other normal day, except you one-tap the scientist and save the world. But you do kinda get beaten to death. But still, you're a hero and the world goes on as it was meant to. It then shows a sequence of historical events which follow on from after the 50s, lots of tension and conflict, but our reality is still a lot better than the one in the game. I guess the explanation for all the monsters and mutants you fight is to test you, but overall a fairly interesting story. I know a lot of people don't like time travel stuff, but it could have been a lot worse. Remember, this game got given 1s and 2s. The game is far from perfect, and I did underline its flaws, but it does have some merit. It's got a great soundtrack, the art and level design is decent, and the story is kinda interesting, and there really isn't that many games that deal with Soviet themes and aesthetics, at least for a Western audience. And it's why I wanted to review the game in the first place. It's unique and interesting, and it is ultimately flawed in the end. But all the reviews I read and the few YouTube videos about it I saw didn't really give it a fair take. So hopefully this video was at least more fair. So where can you actually get the game? Well, short of buying it from a reseller on eBay or Amazon, you'll have to pirate it. I'm generally not a fan of pirating games, let alone recommending it on my video, but considering there is a finite amount of physical copies of this game and there's no digital retailer for this game, it's kind of the best choice in a sense. When I asked one of the developers about it, he reluctantly accepted, since for many people it is the only way to play the game. And while he said that it's unlikely that we'll see UIMD on Steam anytime soon, there's more of a chance that we'll get to see his remake, Remind of Empty, which is a modern reconstruction of a game, cutting out the mediocre combat to focus more on the game's atmosphere and offer a journey into the past of an unknown culture for the Western public. there'll be a link in the description if you want to follow the progress of this game. And that's it for You Are Empty. I hope you enjoyed the review, and I hope you found the game interesting like I did. Now for a bit of an update. So first off, I do want to apologize since it's been over 3 months since my last video. I did get a pretty bad flu, but I also have been lazy as usual, but I missed making videos and I wanted to bring just something out now, something shorter. So I have a fairly big list to pick from of games I'm interested in reviewing, stuff that I find fun, stuff that is obscure. A lot of it is from Russia and other Slavic countries, because you all know I'm a fan of that stuff. Another thing, I removed Stalker Lore videos. I already made a thing about it. I made a lot of things about it, but just, I'll put it in a video. It's not really the focus of the channel anymore, is it? You can still watch them, they're just unlisted. Made me lose like 500,000 views. A lot of people unsubbed, and that kind of sucks, but I understand it because if I'm not having those kinds of videos, what's the point of being subbed? But I want to focus on reviews, and I just want to be straightforward with people about it. So let me know your thoughts on my plans, any criticisms you have, any advice, and a big thank you to my first patron, Charles. I only really made a Patreon because they were going to make it more expensive to have one if you didn't make one by a certain date. So I made one, I got a patron, big thanks. It's per video, and there's only one tier. I wanted to make it very straightforward. You either, want to give me $1 or not. I don't really want to talk about too much, but it's there if you care. If not, hey, whatever. Good job, Charles.